This week on Bedtime Stories, we will be relating a number of stories pertaining to nocturnal mysteries. Instances in which those who work throughout the hours of darkness have been subjected to bewildering and inexplicable occurrences. Join us as we return to the Nightshift. In recent years, amongst the many subjects we have covered, none has resonated with our audience quite as much as our Nightshift episode. Our exploration of these eerie accounts experienced by night workers seemed to strike a chord with our viewers, resulting in a notable increase in the amount of subscribers reaching out to us. Many of those who contacted the channel related that they too had worked night shifts at some point in their employment, and they could strongly empathise with the experiences depicted in the episode. Some offered their own perspectives and personal feedback based on similar roles and experiences. A small number of respondents, however, told stories of how they too had encountered strange and unnatural incidents whilst working in the hours of darkness, and that they now felt emboldened to share their tales with us and their fellow viewers. As we have already covered in a previous episode, the remote city of Nome is somewhat notorious for its numerous unexplained disappearances. However, there is another, lesser-known aspect to this tiny city situated on the far western shores of the Alaskan wilderness, one in which residents have reported witnessing inexplicable occurrences which defy rational explanation. George, a subscriber who worked at the Nome Police Department in the late 90s, experienced a deeply unsettling event, along with his fellow officers. Due to the region's unpredictable weather conditions, it was not uncommon for the staff of the Nome Police Department to be restricted in their movements by heavy snowfall from time to time. One night, during a particularly bad snowstorm, George and 3 of his colleagues found themselves working their entire shift within the confines of the police station, unable to go out on patrol due to the harsh weather. For the same reason, and due to the lateness of the hour, the volume of calls was minimal, but at around 2 AM, George was at his desk catching up on some administrative tasks when one of his colleagues called him to the back of the office. On the CCTV monitor dedicated to the building's aging surveillance system, they saw a small figure walking towards the station, partially visible amidst the swirling snow. George initially thought it was a young child, but as he continued to observe, he realised that the figure's movements were confident and deliberate, not typical of a lone youngster. The figure approached from the plains to the east and finally arrived at the station, but instead of going to the main entrance as would be expected, it disappeared around the side. Wondering who on earth would be walking around in that weather and at that time, the 2 officers spent several minutes switching between various cameras before they were able to locate the mysterious figure once again. This time they saw that it was standing at the rear of the building, with its hands up over its brow, peering in through the window of one of the rear entrances. The poor quality of the CCTV system made it impossible to discern any details about the figure, other than its diminutive size and dark clothing. George remained at his post monitoring the camera, whilst his colleague went downstairs to investigate further. Moments later, he saw his fellow officer appear on screen, approaching the door where the figure was peering in. The officer's radio then sounded, stating that he was standing right next to the entrance and that he could not see anyone standing outside. George briefly began to suspect that he was the unwitting target of some prank, until he called over another of his colleagues from the other side of the office. They both stared at the screen and confirmed to each other that they could see the figure standing outside the doorway, and yet the officer downstairs reported back that it was clear. George asked his other colleague to continue watching the screen, whilst he made his way downstairs to join his partner at the rear entrance. Upon arriving in the hallway, he could see that there was nothing beyond the glass pane, besides the raging blizzard outside, and yet the officer upstairs confirmed that the figure was still standing there, staring directly at both of them. Just as they were deliberating whether to go out and investigate further, they were summoned back up to the second floor. The officer at the CCTV monitor pointed to the grainy footage on screen, revealing yet another shadowy figure, identical in size and stature to the first, this time with its face pressed up against the glass of the double doors at the main entrance. At this point, George radioed the fourth officer on duty at the front desk, asking if he could see anyone at the doorway. When his colleague replied that there was no one there, he requested a closer inspection. Watching on the monitor as the officer approached the front doors, staring straight at the spot where the mysterious figure was standing, he was disturbed to hear the desk officer report back that the entrance was completely clear. As the hours passed and the snow continued to fall outside the station, several small figures materialized on the CCTV system, taking up positions at doors and windows, silently surveying the station's interior despite the harsh weather conditions. Physical checks by the officers revealed no signs of any intruders at the locations in question, despite them still being clearly visible on the CCTV monitors. Several hours later, as the storm began to abate, the squat shapes quietly disappeared, leaving no trace of their presence, not even footprints. The officers were left bewildered, unable to determine who or what those small figures were, where they came from, and ultimately, what their intent was on that dark and freezing cold night. Throughout her nursing career, Simona Galliano dedicated her skills to the Mexico Americano Hospital in Guadalajara. Over the years, she bore witness to the best and worst of humanity. From heart-wrenching moments when patients had to be turned away due to a lack of appropriate facilities, to families and friends coming together to support their loved ones in the face of terminal diagnoses. But it was a traumatic event during the closing weeks of 2003 that left a lasting impression upon her. It revolved around a young male patient named Emilio, whom Simona was caring for. Emilio had suffered severe damage to one of his vertebrae, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. Due to the nature of his injury, he was still able to breathe unaided and communicate normally, and despite his dire circumstances, Emilio remained surprisingly cheerful and optimistic during the 2 weeks he was under Simona's care. Intrigued by his positive outlook, she asked him how he managed to stay so calm in the face of such adversity. With an uncertain smile, the teenager tentatively revealed to her that he had been in contact with extraterrestrial entities since he was a young child. According to Emilio, these beings communicated with him telepathically, and after his accident, they had assured him that they could preserve his mind and soul, regardless of his physical condition. He went on to say that they had given him a specific date, the 3rd of December, when they would visit him at the hospital to separate his consciousness from his body and take him with them. Realizing that this date was only 3 days away, Simona initially dismissed this revelation as a possible delusion, induced by the amount of medication her patient was taking. However, despite her skepticism, she could not fully shake off the lingering sense of unease that Emilio's words had left her with. On the evening of the 2nd of December, Simona arrived at the hospital and clocked in for her shift, just like any other night, and made a point to check on her favourite patient. She found Emilio lying in bed, watching television, and after administering his medication, he soon fell asleep. Little did she know that this would be the last time she would see him alive. At approximately 3 a.m, an emergency alarm cut short a conversation between her and a colleague. Rushing to the nurse's station, they were horrified to discover that the alarm was Emilio's. His monitor was not showing any vital signs. They immediately sprinted to his room, only to find the sheets of his bed pulled back, and the teenager nowhere to be seen. A thorough check of the security cameras revealed no evidence of anyone entering or leaving Emilio's room. The hospital's wider CCTV network was also checked, but yielded no results. Just as the matter was about to be reported to the police as a possible kidnapping, an auxiliary who had been helping to conduct the search rushed up to the nurse's station and breathlessly informed them that Emilio was now back in his bed. Simona rushed into his room and was shocked to find Emilio lying exactly where she had left him earlier, with his sheets pulled back up and the monitor reconnected. To her horror, there were no signs of life in the youngster. He appeared to have passed away peacefully in his sleep. Further investigations, including a post-mortem examination, could not determine the cause of Emilio's death. There were no additional injuries or drugs found in his system, beyond what was already documented in his medical file. The hospital's CCTV system provided no clues as to how Emilio had temporarily disappeared and then returned to his room, especially considering he was unable to move. The mystery of how he was seemingly removed from his bed and then returned without detection remains unsolved. Although he disappeared for only a matter of minutes, this brief event has left Simona pondering the existence of unknown forces or powers that may be beyond human comprehension. Emilio's remains were eventually buried according to the wishes of his loved ones, but the bizarre events surrounding his passing continue to haunt Simona to this day. During the summer of 2013, Carl Whitehouse found himself working for a private security company that operated across multiple sites in and around the southwest of England. The frequent travel to distant locations was taking a toll on his home life. Determined to find a more fixed assignment, he approached his manager to inquire about available opportunities. As luck would have it, the company had recently acquired a contract for a prison building which had been shut down by the Home Office earlier that year. The plan was to eventually convert the sprawling complex into a private venture, but for now, the company needed security coverage for the site. 2 security guards had already been assigned to patrol the building to deter crimes such as metal theft and vandalism, but there was still 1 vacancy left to be filled. Given that the former prison was conveniently located close to Carl's home, he eagerly agreed to take on the role, as it would help him save on travel time and fuel costs. The following month, he received his new assignment and joined 2 other local contractors to provide 24-hour on-site security for the premises. Working in shifts of 8 hours each, the 3 security officers ensured that the site was always manned, with a dog handling unit available for backup if needed. Carl quickly familiarized himself with the layout of the aging building, devising patrol routes for its 4 internal wings and various outbuildings. However, it wasn't long before Carl experienced something quite out of the ordinary. Something that defied all reason and logic. Despite the monotonous nature of his work, he found the prison contract to be one of the best he had ever been awarded. Being native to the area, he knew the local community well, including the families of the occasional chancers he sometimes had to chase off-site. He had also taken the time to read up on the history of the facility, which had been used by the army during and after World War II, and he quite enjoyed exploring various parts of the old building during the darkest hours. One night, whilst deep in the bowels of the prison with only his torch to guide him, Carl heard a low rumbling sound that rapidly grew in intensity, causing the walls to vibrate. Intrigued rather than unnerved, he pressed on with his patrol, only to come to an abrupt halt as he turned a corner. The walls of the corridor in front of him were cracked and worn, with stones scattered on the floor where sections had given way. In some parts, the wall had completely crumbled, revealing a purplish hue of light from the night sky outside. Alarmed but curious, Carl retraced his steps, only to find that the walls of the corridor he had just passed through were similarly degraded. His confidence began to falter as he hurriedly made his way back towards the main entrance of the building. The other buildings surrounding the complex appeared to be in a similar state of decay, and the landscape outside, which had seemed ordinary in daylight, now looked almost apocalyptic under an unnatural purple moon in the night sky. As Carl moved out through the main doors and moved into the area where the car park used to be, he was utterly shocked as he saw a deserted wasteland stretching out before him, with the ruins of old buildings in the distance. From behind long dead trees and large boulders, he saw tall and slender figures, dark and unmoving. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as they remained where they were, intently regarding him from a distance. When one of the figures finally began to move towards him, effecting an odd, fluid motion, Carl turned and ran back into the depths of the prison. The rumbling sensation resumed, building in intensity, before abruptly ceasing. He emerged into a pristine corridor, identical to the one in which the encounter had begun. He cautiously retraced his steps, but there was no trace of the damaged walls or the purple sky he had seen just moments before. He continued to work at the prison for another year, but never experienced anything similar again, nor did he hear of any comparable encounters from his colleagues. He couldn't help but regard the old building with a sense of curiosity whenever he passed by it after his contract had ended, always wondering about what he had experienced there one night in the summer of 2013. Similar to the other encounters we have related, we are once again left puzzled and unable to fully comprehend the experiences shared by those who have come forward. Their stories defy rational explanation, pointing towards a peculiar phenomenon that seems to occur during the dark hours. It appears that as a species, we become more susceptible to the strange and bizarre during this time, isolated and vulnerable to forces beyond our comprehension. Those who work during daylight hours may never encounter such inexplicable occurrences, remaining unaware of the mysteries that unfold in the shadows of the night. Can you see anyone in there, John?
No, the place is deserted, which is a bugger because I need a piss.
Bedtime Stories.